Okay, let's see how this goes. So, hi, I'm Nova. I'm a digital OC artist who loves drawing, surprise, surprise, my beloved little OCs. I'm also a 3D animator. That's what I've been studying for the past 2 years in college. And now I'm officially out of college, which is... wow. It's been a rough ride, let me tell you that. So while I look for a job in a very competitive industry, which may take a while, might as well do something, right? And today I'm actually doing something. So what exactly am I doing? Well, I mentioned in my maybe comeback video that I wanted to talk about my OCs as part of the content I make. So why not just some commentary over a speed paint? I'm sure most of you in the art community are familiar with this type of content. With that said, what or who is the subject of today's video? Two very criminally neglected OCs of mine named Kayden and Marley. And I say neglected because it's been 3 years since I last drew these characters, and henceforth, I don't actually have a lot to talk about them. If you're an artist with piles of OCs, I'm sure you can relate. You see, the reason for said neglect of these two precious OCs of mine is because I've been working on a story known as Align Our Stars for years now. The OCs of mine involved in Align Our Stars are the ones that usually appear more often across my social media platforms. And are way more loved, I won't deny that. Kayden and Marley are not part of Align Our Stars. These two are actually part of a spin-off to a different story I've got on the back burner, which, might I add, the whole thing was purely because I was sleep deprived at 3 AM. Delusion at its finest, guys. I do want to talk about Align Our Stars eventually, but AOS is a much larger story to dive into, and the OCs in that storyline are just as complex. Plus, there's a lot more of them than just 2. So consider this a sort of test run, me just easing back into things and figuring stuff out. Also, keep in mind I haven't done this in a while, and my first take of this ended up being only 5 to 6 minutes long, which was way too short for the amount of footage I had. But I'll just cut my losses if this ends up being about the same amount of time. I'll just have to be picky with the footage. So I apologize in advance if I seem very rusty at this or my audio isn't the greatest. So without further delay, let's get into things. Let's start off with the story these two are actually a part of. The story Kayden and Marley exist in is called Unarmed Advocate, which I might change the title to, but that's the story that's been in the graveyard for 3 years. And it also cracked through the TikTok algorithm somehow? I have no idea how that happened. This story revolves around a young man named Aspen who is possessed by a powerful and ancient demon that attracts a lot of unwanted and dangerous attention. Such attention also includes the city's most powerful mafia boss and so-called devil's advocate named Ling Chuan. However, separating the demon from Aspen proves to be more difficult than anticipated. Ling Chuan then offers protection for the young man while they try to find a solution to free him from the demon. God, I hope I said Ling Chuan's name right. Despite being half Chinese, I am not fluent at all and my ancestors would be disgraced by me. The best I can do is count to 10 and say hi and goodbye. I am so sorry. And as a little side note, if you've seen this video on my channel, this is in relation to Unarmed Advocate, but of course I never got back to it, so. Anyway, Kayden and Marley actually have little involvement in the main story of Unarmed Advocate, which is why they have their own spin-off focusing on just them. Their story takes place in their own little corner of the same city, specifically the Lower City, a largely forgotten and neglected area. This spin-off is more grounded, more of a slice of life and romantic kind of tale, and focuses on their relationship to each other and how the world around them treats them. Getting into them individually, let's start with Marley. Marley is a young adult trans man who is sharp-spirited yet very defensive, and who has lived in the Lower City his whole life. And being born a halfling, or half-demon, he and others of his kind are highly discriminated against, which is also why they are the ones to populate the Lower City the most, to which Marley is very quick to share his thoughts on anyone coming from a more privileged life. He's very protective of the life he has, despite its flaws. Marley was orphaned from a young age, for one reason or another, but he was quickly picked up and raised by a down-to-earth, no-nonsense kind of woman, who shall not be named because she doesn't have a name, who owns a local stripper club. Everything Marley learned about navigating life in the Lower City on his own, he learned from her. Once Marley was old enough, he actually ended up working for the club as one of its most profitable performers. He's a really good dancer, if you know what I mean. Kayden, on the other hand, is an ex-military man in his 30s, gruff, emotionally closed off, and has a healthy dose of PTSD from his time in service. He's also very nihilistic in the sense that he no longer feels the need to put so much effort into his life. Despite all of that, Kayden actually had a decent upbringing, but his relationship with his family wasn't the strongest, and when he got older, he felt pressured by them to join the military. During his service, Kayden would end up injured. This injury would leave him half deaf, partially blind, and scar-ridden along the right side of his body. Upon being discharged, Kayden would move to the lower city and maintain low contact with his family. He became a social recluse, kept to himself, and just didn't feel the need to put so much effort into a world that hasn't treated him well. In a sense, this was sort of his way of just disappearing, falling off the radar. Which creates an interesting dynamic between Kayden and Marley, where Marley is actually quite content with his life despite his hardships, while Kayden is unhappy and actively sabotaging his way of life to just not be as involved anymore. And that's basically their whole thing, just two characters making their way through life one mess at a time, surviving in a city that couldn't care less about them. And gosh, do I love them so very much, especially when I draw them all lovey-dovey with each other. It's so good. It's one of those situations where you can't do one thing without doing the other. These two are always within 1 foot of each other. They are quite literally a packaged pair, so separating them is a sin. But that's all I have in terms of talking about them. There wasn't much for me to actually work with here. It has been 3 years in case anyone needs a reminder. Who knows if they get banished right back to the OC graveyard again, which I don't really want to do, but I just have so many OCs it's hard to keep my attention on all of them, especially since the set of OCs in AOS are currently my main focus. There's a lot of potential with Kayden and Marley, especially if I ever dive into telling a more down-to-earth kind of story. What said story actually ends up being about is still up in the air. I do actually have a draft of a chapter where Kayden meets Marley for the first time, as in he's dragged out to the stripper club and notices Marley performing, and the two get a chance to talk afterwards, despite Marley being very defensive about the interaction, but that's as far as it goes. Maybe, if I were to continue this, I just focus on Kayden and Marley's eventual relationship and how they navigate the world together. Maybe Marley helps Kayden learn to just live life again. Maybe throw in an identity crisis or two, cause why not? Or just find out how else I can make this as gut-wrenching as possible. I am always here for the trauma. Just keep that in mind, as I am a hardcore sadist to my OCs and love jiggling them around in the trauma box. One thing for sure though, if Kayden and Marley's story ever continues, I want it to feel real. A story that someone can relate to in the sense that this story reflects real-life experiences, even if the story is largely fictional. I'll just need some practice writing a few things, such as the darker and more sensitive themes I definitely want this spin-off to take on, and the slow build-up to the canonical romantic relationship between the two. I'm not exactly the greatest at writing romance unless said romance has already been established, and in terms of the sensitive stuff, tons and tons of research for that part, because the worst thing I could possibly do is end up misrepresenting a particularly sensitive situation, and I'd end up putting myself in the grave for it. For now, it's just something to think about. And that comes to the end of this video. I hope you all enjoyed watching me draw these two blorbos of mine and listening to me ramble about them, with the lack of stuff I actually had to talk about them. If you want to see more art from me, or hear more about Align Our Stars, the story I'm actually working on, feel free to subscribe and check out my other socials linked in the description, especially Blue Sky since that's where I'm the most active. Thanks for hanging out with me, and until next time.